It is time to talk about configuring policy for environment cleanup. Now, why cleanup? Again, if you have this policy implemented from day one, no worries. If your environment is not big, like maybe dozens or hundreds of groups, ownerless groups, no worries. But if your environment is large and you have this environment for a few years and you already have maybe thousands or even more ownerless groups, you would probably think of carefully preparing for policy implementation. That's why environment cleanup. You can see on this chart, green line is your regular volume of emails or notifications in your environment per user. If you have many ownerless groups, and if you implement this policy, red line is probably what you will get. Now, users, if they got too many emails from IT, they tend to ignore. If they got emails that not relevant for them, it's the easiest way to lose users' trust. So remember, we do not have second chance to reach users. After all emails are sent for the group, no emails will be sent ever. And our ultimate goal is to get rid of ownerless groups, to find proper owners for ownerless groups, not just to send emails. So ideally, we would send only relevant emails to users, and maybe it would be a good idea to decrease level of emails that comes to users. So it would be purple line. And any cleanup starts from getting reports. So before you act, you would know your data. Consider getting reports on all group details, including name, email, visibility, all the services connected to the group. You would need report on group's activity, including all the details like creation date, last activity date, last modified date. You would need to get data on number of files in this group, active files, storage consumed by the SharePoint site, activity in Yammer, Exchange, and so on. And of course, you would need number of members, number of owners, number of guests in the group. You can get this report with PowerShell custom scripts, Microsoft Graph API, usage reports helps you, and of course there are third-party tools. Start with knowing your environment, getting all the detailed report so we can classify your groups and select probably different approaches for different groups categories. One of the group categories would be groups that require individual approach. For example, there might be high visible groups in your environment. Those usually are public groups with large number of members. Examples are Yammer or Teams public groups that were created to engage everybody in the organization. The other category could be groups with top management as members. PowerShell is your friend here to detect such groups, but I believe both categories require individual approach. So you would probably try to get proper people as group owners before policy implementation. You can classify your groups based on content. On this chart, you can see typical content distribution across the groups. Usually a few groups have a lot of files in there, and majority of groups have few files in there. Using content-based approach, consider number of active files as a preferred parameter over storage consumed, because in many cases, sites with gigabytes of data are usually sites with one or two files and thousands of versions of these files. Consider also number of Yammer messages or number of emails. What I personally like more is activity-based approach. For example, older groups with 1 or 2 years of inactivity probably candidates for deletion. If you are not ready to delete groups with less than 1 year of inactivity, you might choose archive approach. You can get activity report with Microsoft Graph usage reports, but consider not only groups activity, but also Teams and SharePoint activity reports, because sometimes activity that happened directly on SharePoint site is not reflected on the groups activity report. Now, deleting versus archiving approach. When we delete group, all the group connected services will be deleted also, including team, if there is a team, SharePoint site, emails, and so on. SharePoint site will be retained for 93 days in recycle bin, including documents, lists, pages. The rest of the group content will be retained for 30 days, including chat messages and so on. So during this retention period, you can restore content. That is why Microsoft says it's soft delete. Archive and backup functionality that was recently announced at Microsoft Inspire conference is not what we need. That archive functionality is more about moving sites from expensive, hard, fast storage to cheaper, less expensive cold storage. But everything else stays the same. Group membership, group content, archive functionality that we need is some kind of screen test or some kind of staging phase before actual groups deletion. For example, with SharePoint PowerShell command, you can set up site to read-only mode or to no access mode. So site will not be deleted, but users will lose access to the site. This approach is good, but if the site is Teams connected, team functionality will not be affected. So consider another PowerShell command from Teams module where you can set up team to archival state. That basically freezes the team, freezes all Teams activity. As part of this command, you can optionally set SharePoint site to read-only mode. If this is not enough for you, you can separately set the sites to no access mode. There are third-party tools with a similar functionality. For example, SysKitPoint has its own archival functionality, which is basically removing access for members and owners from this group. SysKitPoint saves group's configuration and renames it to archival. So group and SharePoint site connected is not deleted. It stays in the environment, but nobody has access to this group. Remember that archived sites and groups are still in the policy scope. So if you implement the policy will work also against archived sites. So again, consider archiving stage as kind of screen test or staging phase before actual deletion. If you have retention policy implemented in your environment or sites or groups that are a subject for a legal hold, those groups and sites will not be deleted. So cleaning up environment, we are pretty much safe here. There must be separate category of ownerless groups that are fully orphan. I mean, groups with no members and no owners. These groups are not the subject of policy because we have nobody to notify, no members in this group. But no owners and no members does not automatically mean that nobody uses related SharePoint site. Because, for example, public groups with SharePoint sites behind allows access for everybody. There might be content shared directly with users, or there might be groups with private channel sites. So thinking of approach for these groups, I would consider more content and activity. You might choose trying to find owners of these groups, but that would be custom solution. With PowerShell scripts, you can probably find all the documents authors and try to reach colleagues or managers. The other approach would be what we already discussed, archive and delete approach. Some more ideas before actual policy activation. Think of big picture. You don't want to interfere with other campaigns or activity with notifications. Maybe you have lifecycle management policy or minimum maximum number of owners policy. You don't want this to interfere with your ownerless policy. If you say to users that sites will be deleted, plan actual sites deletion ahead. Consider exchange 10,000 emails per account throttling. You might want to pilot in this policy before applying to all groups to finalize your email template and ensure that all supporting pages are working good. You might consider to communicate to users before policy implementations, and you would definitely talk to help desk, service desk, so they are prepared and know what to do and ready for possible tickets. If we are dealing with massive deletion, we will face increased number of tickets to restore sites or groups. And users might share with you incomplete information. They just might don't know group name or team name. So be prepared to have all the report on deleted groups and sites so you are able to help users. If you are deleting really large amount of sites and groups, consider some kind of automation to restore sites groups. Kind of simple application where help desk people can enter site URL or group name. This application would restore group and site. And we are almost ready for policy activation. But again, thinking of we do not have any other chances to reach ownerless groups members, consider multiple waves. For this, you would select length of policy for maximum, for example, 7 weeks, and consider first 3 or 4 weeks with number of active members to notify like 2 or 3, soft messaging, and for groups that are still ownerless after 3 or 4 weeks of policy, consider wave 2. You can reconfigure the policy to expand number of members to notify, and you might consider more strong language in your email template. That's basically it for implementing this policy in the existing environment. Now, how to track this policy? Actually, the only way you can see this policy in action, besides, of course, looking over the user's shoulder, is to use audit logs. Audit logs, this is where you can see how the policy detected ownerless groups or sent emails. Consider saving audit logs so you can measure users' acceptance. For audit logs, there will be a separate video, and after your policy complete cleanup, you might configure changing the policy configuration to permanent state, and that would be a separate video again. Thank you. See you next time.